What is the pragmatist's guide to crafting religion?
Well, so this book really stemmed from our work on pronatalism. If you look within and between countries, when you look at declining fertility rates, there's a few things that seem to be leading indicators of it, right? Like what's going to cause it? The more prosperity a country has, the more gender equality a country has, the more access to education a country has. Now, these are all good things. Like we want more of all of these things in the world. So the solution is not to make countries poorer to fix this problem, right? Like I don't think that that's I've heard some, fringe people who have these ideas, but that's not where we want to go. So then our question is okay, in the face of prosperity, in the face of wide access to education, what does allow groups to have high fertility rates? And the answer is culture. Culture is what does it. Culture, religion, however you want to put it. We call them cultivars. Often culture and religion are sort of mixed together into this blob. And the Pragmatist Guide to Crafting Religion is on one, understanding how and why religions and cultures change over time. Two, understanding where this new, at least from a demographic perspective, parasitic cultural group comes from. I think many people would call it like wokeism. We call it the urban monoculture, the virus, whatever you want to call it. It is the dominant cultural group in the world today. It primarily operates out of cities, and it is very low fertility, and therefore it can only survive, really, or stay at an equal population by taking children or new members from demographically healthy nearby cultural groups, which obviously is creating conflict there. So we wrote our book both to help older traditions build resistance to this, parasitism, while also helping individuals who align more with this urban monoculture to edit their own family's culture to be demographically healthy, to learn what they can from the more traditional systems, which it's not just about fertility rates. I mean, obviously that's one thing that draws us here, but if you look, for example, in America, you look at the statistics, if you look at people who identify as progressive, like the mental health problems are really high, and identifying as progressive basically means you're in the urban monoculture, right? The mental health problems are really high, the suicide rates are really high, like it could use some updating to best serve its adherents. As this culture formed, I think it was trying to do the right thing. It said, if you join us as a cultural group, you can do whatever makes you happy. All of these old rules that religions used to have, all of these old restrictions, they were pointless.
They're mean.
They're mean,
it's
right?
It's not fair. It doesn't seem right.
You can be whoever you want to be, and you'll be affirmed for that. And this is a really kind-hearted and good idea, right? But when you tell people this, right, like when that is how you got them into your culture, you're going to have a really hard time motivating sacrifice. And children require sacrifice, right? Second, this group never really needed to motivate high fertility because it had always performed best within the academic context, like within university systems, within high schools, within middle schools, which were a great source of potential new recruits. So it just didn't really ever have any cultural evolutionary pressure on it getting good at motivating reproductive rates within its own community. And for a while, I think that this allowed for a great symbiosis between multiple cultural groups. But now it's really depleted the populations in the countries where it's big of, I'd say, like easily scalpable, healthy demographic groups. By that, what I mean is, the more conservative groups are less likely to send their kids to college now. They're less likely to allow their kids to go into the institutions. Like you can look at the rise of homeschooling and stuff like that, that were part of the conversion pipeline for this cultural group. And as that has happened, the iterations of this urban monoculture that were more aggressive, more focused on university systems, more exclusionary and sort of xenophobic to people with alternate belief systems, they have outcompeted the kinder traditional aspects of this cultural group. And so it's just cultural evolution. No one here with ever being Machiavellian, and even people within the culture, they do not believe they're doing anything wrong. I mean, no one ever believes they're doing anything wrong when they're participating in what can really be thought of as a systemic cultural genocide campaign. And it's not that they went into it with that it was first, we'll just recruit people. But now because they're running low on people to recruit, they're basically overfishing the waters around them. And you can see this in how bad fertility rates have gotten. So if you look at the fertility rate decline in the United States between 2010 and 2020, and you project this going forwards, and you assume that we're going to have one generation every 30 years, that means for every 100 Americans today, you're going to have something like 4.3 great-grandchildren. Like, it is catastrophic. And people are hiding, I think, from the general public how bad fertility rates have gotten across the world. You know, in America, you bring this up, they go, well, we can fix this with immigrants. And I go, well, don't you know that even by the UN's own statistics, as of 2019, all of Latin America, so Central America, South America, and the Caribbean collectively fell below repopulation rate. And they're like, well, there's got to still be like these high fertility countries. India fell below repopulation rate this year. In fact, right now, for a country to be above repopulation rate on average, the average citizen has to earn less than 5,000 USD per year. And I would like to think that we and everyone else can come to the common ground that no one should be living a life in that degree of poverty, and that it should be our goal in countries that are more privileged to help uplift all countries. But if that's our plan, we cannot be economically reliant on them staying poor, which we are as long as we are operating an economy that requires a consistent flow of immigrants to make up for the fact that we aren't putting in the effort to raise our own children.
A more fundamental and practical takeaway that the book communicates, obviously we share a lot of these really deep, big, sweeping ideas, but more practically, what we're saying is humanity has evolved alongside religion/culture ever since there was civilization. So basically, as soon as life got complicated, we started living in cities, instead of really small tribes together. We needed essentially additional software to run on top of our hardware in order to function properly, in order to deal with this rapid innovation and complexity. And so for millennia, humans have evolved alongside culture. And we can see how over time culture has evolved in a way that enables us to adapt to very weird environments. The problem is that now as we've reached modernity, a lot of cultures are becoming quite soft, which is what Malcolm was describing in terms of especially the sort of mainstream monoculture saying, it's okay, everyone goes to heaven, do whatever you want, when you want, etc. Like nothing is hard anymore. As people sort of strip away the hard elements of culture, they're also taking away a lot of cultural technologies that civilizations evolved to be able to function. So why we're seeing crashing fertility rates, why we're seeing plummeting mental health rates, especially among those who have sort of left hard cultures and just sort of done whatever makes them feel good in the moment, is because of this loss of culture. So what motivated Malcolm to write The Pragmatist Guide to Crafting Religion is, oh my gosh, this is obviously not working for us, but there is a simple solution. And so if you don't want to go back to Orthodox Judaism or hardline Islam or become Amish, that's okay. That's why the book is called The Guide to Crafting Religion. Either it's how do you make religion resilient in the modern age to the internet, to globalism, to the monoculture, which may try to convert away your kids, or how do you take the values that you have in a modern progressive culture and build them into a culture that behaves the way that software is supposed to behave, that makes us resilient in the face of modernity and social media and addiction and all these things that are really hard for us to adapt to in modern society.
What I really love about this framing you're using here, Simone, is it reminds me about how, because when we say like we've lost culture, that's almost like saying we've lost food. Like, no, we haven't lost food, right? The problem is that the food we have now, historically, the food that we had was hard to get. So you naturally would mix your sources of food intake. You naturally would be fasting occasionally. But today we live in an environment where you can ultra refine food to hit all of your brain's pleasure pathways at once. And we know today if you do nothing but eat Doritos all day, that's going to cause negative physiological and sociological effects. It's the same with these modern urban monocultures. It is an ultra refined culture to give people and maximize all of the pleasure centers in their brain simultaneously. There are no punishments for anything that you naturally feel like you want to do. All of these things in the moment are trying to make people feel good, but it wasn't the environment we evolved in, and it's leading to really negative ramifications for people's mental health and basic civilizational maintenance, like raising children.
So here's one key cultural technology that many, and you'll see this
Mhm.
across almost every traditional hardware line religion, which is some sort of inhibitory control practice mechanism. By that I mean fasting or something like Lent, where you have to give something up. This was extremely common across cultures, across religion, and it obviously had many practical uses, but what it also helped humans do, especially in cultures that became more abundant, was develop inhibitory control, to learn how to say no, to learn how to do without. And sometimes this also came in the form of like waking up in the middle of the night to pray, basically like things that required discipline. And it builds those muscles essentially in your brain. So a fallout that we're experiencing as we've now adopted cultures that don't include giving anything up, that it's always like, no, do what you feel like, reinforce what you feel good doing, is people are not developing that inhibitory control. And then they're more likely to succumb to extremely addictive loops, be it TikTok, be it ultra processed food that's making them deeply sick, or be it intrusive thoughts, anxiety.
Yeah, so telling somebody that they should not do something that they want to do as a cultural group today within the urban monoculture would be seen as sinful. If you're telling somebody not to do something that they want to do and it doesn't cause immediate pain to anyone else, that's seen as a wrong thing to do. But historically, no culture on earth thought that was a wrong thing to do. And I think we need to ask, why is that the case? Like her arbitrary self-denial ritual she's talking about, whether it's Ramadan or Lent or Feast of the Firstborn, you are going to see this in every cultural group. Why do we see these things reappearing? And it was because they had utility. And it's like the fence problem. We, as a society, as we began to secularize, as we began to learn more about science, it was like we saw these random fences and we're like, oh, why is this fence here? And somebody's like, I don't know. And so they're like, okay, remove the fence. And if you don't know why the fence is there, then maybe you shouldn't be removing it. But this isn't, our movement is about saying so much more than just the cultural things, but I do think that the cultural solution is the easiest. It is the most realistic, but it's not as straightforward as a lot of people think. So there was a great study done recently by Arya Babu, who, we're big fans of. And what it showed is that while it is true that within a country, the more conservative you are, the higher a fertility rate you will have. If you control for prosperity of countries, so like you're just looking at countries within Europe, the more conservative a country is in total on average, the lower a fertility rate they will have. So within a country, these more hard conservative practices or these more hard cultural practices lead to higher fertility rates. But between countries, they lead to lower fertility rates. And the question is, it's a small correlation, but it goes against what a lot of people would intuit. Right? And so looking at stuff like this and figuring out what the heck is going on here, right? I think that this actually relates to another thing that really surprises people when they look at it. A lot of people are like, okay, our fertility rates are going down. The way we save our culture is by barring immigration, barring other people from coming into our country. Yet when you control for the prosperity of a country, it's typically the highest diversity countries that have the highest fertility rates for all cultural groups within the country, like Israel or the USA, right? Whereas the lowest diversity prosperous countries like Korea typically have the lowest fertility rate. And I think within both of these instances, we are actually seeing the same thing, which is what leads to cultural fidelity, what makes it easy to maintain harder cultural practices, is a sense of cultural identity. And cultural identity is most firmly imbued within a group when they can see people who are not them, who are different from them. And through seeing people who are different from them, or through being in an environment that they see as fundamentally hostile to them, like their culture doesn't, dominate their country's government, they can it's easy to understand where pressure needs to go to fix this for you and your people, right? And that's what's so interesting about pronatalism as a cause area, is so many other cause areas are about fixing things at a societal level. Whereas the data seems to show that if people say, okay, let's go back to the way we used to do things. Like, let's at the government level do that, right? It would actually be worse for us. It's not just a difficult fight, it's a counterproductive fight. Pronatalism is a cause that is won at the level of the individual and the family. It means you don't say, you as a society, you have failed. You personally need to work to do better for your family and your cultural group. But also understand that we now live in a world that's very different from the world of the past. The world of the past, it was, one country, one cultural group, one people. That used to be a dominant strategy. But as I said, that strategy doesn't really work anymore. So you need to adapt your culture to work well and build alliances within multicultural environments. As the guy who wrote Richmond, North of Richmond said, America's greatest strength is our diversity. And I think when it comes to pronatalism, that is like a factually and statistically true thing, is our differences which empower us. We're about to go speak at a pronatalist conference, right, here in Austin. And the conference is being run by, conservative, Desnat, Mormons, right? So these are like Mormon separatists, and there's going to be a bunch of tradcasts there. And then you've got us, like secular Calvinists with this weird secular religion for our family. And you look at our audience, it's like mostly ultra-Orthodox Jews. We have a big faction of that. We have a lot of African immigrants who are fans of our show. And I think what it shows is we are in an environment today, a new conservative environment, where we are an alliance of very, very diverse cultural groups with very, very different backgrounds, all working together to try to protect our cultures into the future. The point I make about this is last year, the #1 conservative influencer in the world was Andrew Tate. And he converted to Islam, and the primary response I saw from other conservative influencers was, yay for you. Like, you joined one of the hard culture teams, and we like that. I think that goes so against older stereotypes of what the conservative movement is. We now are an alliance of people where our strength is our diversity. Whereas, and I think you can really see this when you just ask people. So if I talk to, a progressive Jew or a progressive Muslim or a progressive Catholic, and I ask them, what are your views on gender, on sexuality, on our relationship to the environment, on the future of the human species, on general morality, they're going to have about the same answers to that. If I talk to people from, a conservative Muslim, a conservative Jew, a conservative tradcast, they're going to have wildly different answers to all of those questions. And this is really interesting to me, is that the progressive culture constantly says, this urban monoculture constantly says, diversity is a strength, and yet no one is really different. How can diversity be a strength if we're all actually exactly the same? Diversity is a strength because we are different. And I love what I see, this shifting wind within the conservative movement to understanding that and embracing that. And I think that is hopefully what we see from the future. And that as a pronatalist is something we really like, is this increasing vision for a genuinely pluralistic human future. Instead of, I think, what the urban monoculture wants, which is, why would you say diversity is a strength if you don't believe anyone's really different, if you don't really allow people to hold different views? You would say that if what you meant was diversity in victims. We want to be able to recruit people no matter what culture they're from. We just don't want them to be able to hold anything that's fundamentally different about their culture after they convert into our acceptable, non-deplorable cultural group.
If you like this clip, it is part of a much longer conversation that is only available at dadsavesamerica.com. So head on over there and subscribe. It's our Substack where you can get that and so much more. It's a great way to also keep track of everything we're doing here at Dad Saves America.